The wind off the Pacific coast hit Elena Everhart's face like a cold slap of reality, and she wondered for the 100th time why she'd agreed to this ridiculous charity event. She'd never sailed in her life, owned exactly zero nautical-themed anything, and the closest she'd come to water sports was buying overpriced bottled water at her yoga studio. But when her best friend Marcus had begged her to fill in for his sick sister in the annual Harbor Hope sailing race, she'd said yes, because that's what people did when they had zero ability to say no to anyone they cared about. Now she stood on the dock in borrowed sailing gear that smelled faintly of mothballs and sunscreen, watching sleek sailboats bob in the marina like they were laughing at her incompetence. The event was massive, drawing corporate teams from across the region, all competing to raise money for children's literacy programs. Noble cause, terrifying execution. Elena Everhart? A voice cut through her spiraling anxiety. She turned to find a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a cologne advertisement. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that the wind immediately messed up in a way that somehow made him more attractive. He wore sailing gear like it was a second skin, all confidence and casual athleticism. His eyes were a striking gray-blue that reminded her of the ocean itself. "That's me," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Preston Zimmerman. I'm your partner for today." He extended a hand, and when she shook it, his grip was firm and warm. "I have to be honest, I was told my partner had extensive sailing experience." Elena felt her cheeks burn. "And I was told my partner would be patient with beginners." Something shifted in his expression, surprise giving way to what might have been amusement. "Were you now?" Marcus set this up. "He apparently believes in throwing people into the deep end." Marcus Chen. "The event coordinator, the very same. He's my best friend and occasionally my worst enemy." Preston studied her for a moment, and Elena fought the urge to fidget under his gaze. She'd spent the last 3 years building her graphic design business from her apartment into a legitimate studio with 5 employees. She'd pitched to Fortune 500 companies, negotiated contracts, and once talked down an angry client who'd threatened to sue over a shade of blue. She could handle one sailing race with one attractive stranger. "Well," Preston said finally, "I hope you're a fast learner because we've got about 30 minutes before the race starts. I'm very motivated by competition and mild humiliation." That earned her a genuine smile, and Elena felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with nerves about the race. The next 30 minutes were a whirlwind of sailing terminology that made Elena's head spin. Preston explained sheets and halyards, tacking and jibing, wind direction and sail trim. He was patient. She had to give him that, demonstrating each concept and waiting while she tried to absorb information at lightning speed. "The key is to feel the boat," he said as they stood on the deck of their assigned vessel, a sleek 30-footer named Second Wind. "Sailing isn't just about knowing the technical stuff. It's about responding to what's happening in real time." "So it's like jazz," Elena said. He looked at her quizzically. "Jazz? You know, structured improvisation. You have the basic rules, but then you have to feel your way through the actual execution." Preston's expression was unreadable. "I've never heard it described that way, but yes, exactly like that." The starting horn blasted across the marina, and suddenly they were surrounded by organized chaos. Boats jockeyed for position, crews shouted instructions, and the air filled with the sound of sails catching wind and hulls cutting through water. "Ready?" Preston asked, his hand already on the mainsheet. "Absolutely not," Elena said, "but let's do this anyway." What happened next was part disaster, part miracle. Elena fumbled lines and missed calls, nearly got hit in the face by the boom twice, and at one point almost fell overboard reaching for a sheet that got away from her. But Preston never lost his cool. He called out instructions clearly, positioned himself so he could compensate for her mistakes, and somehow kept them not just in the race but actually moving up through the pack. "Sheet in," he called. "No, the other one, port side." Elena grabbed the correct line and pulled, feeling the sail respond, the boat heeling over as they caught the wind properly. They shot forward, spray kicking up from the bow, and she felt a surge of pure exhilaration. "That's it," Preston's voice carried approval. "Hold it steady." They rounded the first marker in 12th place out of 30 boats. By the second marker, they'd climbed to 9th. Elena's arms burned. Her hands were already developing blisters despite the gloves Preston had given her, and she was pretty sure she'd swallowed about a gallon of seawater. She'd also never felt more alive. "Coming about," Preston warned. "Ready to tack." "Ready." Elena positioned herself, remembering the sequence he'd drilled into her. When he called the command, she moved, releasing one sheet and hauling in the other as the boom swung across. They weren't graceful, but they were effective, and the boat responded beautifully. "You're getting it," Preston said, and there was genuine surprise in his voice. "Don't sound so shocked. I'm very capable when properly motivated." "What's motivating you?" "The charity aspect or not wanting to look bad, honestly." "Both." "Also, spite. I really want to prove Marcus wrong about me." Preston laughed, a rich sound that somehow carried over the wind and waves. "Spite is an excellent motivator. I run half my business on strategic spite." "What business is that?" "Manufacturing. Zimmerman Industrial. We make components for aerospace and medical equipment." Elena nearly dropped her sheet. She knew that name. Everyone in the business world did. Zimmerman Industrial was worth billions with facilities across 3 continents. Which meant Preston wasn't just some guy who was good at sailing. He was Preston Zimmerman, the CEO who turned his father's struggling regional company into a global powerhouse before he was 35. "You're staring," Preston said mildly, adjusting their course. "You're a billionaire," Elena blurted, "and you're holding that sheet too loose. Trim it in." She adjusted automatically, her brain still processing. "Why are you doing your own sailing? Don't you have people for this?" "I have people for a lot of things. Sailing isn't one of them. This race is one of the few days a year I get to actually do something with my hands besides sign documents and shake hands at corporate events." He glanced at her. "Is it going to be weird now?" "Is what going to be weird?" "This. You knowing who I am." "People get strange when they realize I have money." Elena considered this. He had a point. She could feel herself already recalibrating, seeing him differently. The confident commands weren't just skill, they were the product of someone used to being in charge. The expensive watch she'd barely noticed now seemed significant. Everything shifted in context. "I'm trying not to let it be weird," she said honestly. "I appreciate the effort." Ready to jibe. They worked through the maneuver, and Elena focused on the task, letting the immediate demands of sailing push other thoughts aside. They were in 7th place now, gaining on the boat ahead of them, a corporate team that clearly sailed together regularly. Preston called out a strategy, something about wind shadow and optimal angles, and Elena just nodded and did what he said. "Hike out," Preston commanded as they heeled hard to port. Elena leaned out over the side, using her weight to balance the boat. The water rushed past just feet from her face, cold spray soaking her already damp clothes. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she held position and the boat responded, practically flying across the water. "Now, ease the sheet." She let line run through her hands, feeling the subtle shift as the sail found its sweet spot. They overtook the 6th-place boat on the outside of a turn, Preston's timing absolutely perfect. The other crew shouted something that might have been congratulations or might have been profanity, and then they were passed, closing on fifth. "You're a natural," Preston said, and he sounded like he actually meant it. "I'm a disaster who's faking it moderately well." That's what being a natural means. Sailing isn't about perfection. It's about adaptation. They flew past the fourth and fifth place boats in quick succession, taking advantage of a wind shift that Preston spotted before anyone else. Elena's heart pounded as they approached the final marker with only 3 boats ahead of them. Third place. They were in third place, and she'd started the day not knowing port from starboard. "Final leg," Preston called. "This is where we either hold position or lose everything." "You tired?" "Exhausted." "Can you give me 5 more minutes of everything you've got?" Elena looked at him, really looked at him. His face was intense with focus, jaw set, eyes calculating angles and distances. But there was something else there too, a kind of joy she recognized because she felt it too. The pure pleasure of doing something difficult and doing it well. 5 minutes, she agreed. "Let's win this thing." What followed was the longest 5 minutes of Elena's life. They pushed the boat to its limits, Preston calling for sail adjustments every few seconds, Elena responding with increasingly sore arms and determination that came from somewhere deep in her core. They gained on third place, pulled even, edged ahead. Second place was just 30 yards in front now. "We can catch them," Preston said, and it wasn't a question. "Tell me what to do." They executed a risky maneuver that involved cutting closer to a marker than was probably smart, but it worked, and suddenly they were neck and neck with second place. The finish line was visible now, a banner stretched between 2 boys about 200 yards ahead. First place was going to win, but second and third were anybody's game. "Sheet in hard," Preston commanded. "Everything you've got." Elena hauled on the line with strength she didn't know she had left. The sail went taut, the boat heeled over at an angle that felt impossible, and they shot forward. Beside them, the second-place boat tried to match their move, but Preston had timed it perfectly, and they had the better angle. They crossed the finish line in second place, just 3 boat lengths behind first and a full 10 seconds ahead of third. Elena collapsed onto the deck, chest heaving, arms shaking, face probably sunburned to a crisp. She'd never felt better in her entire life. "Not bad for your first race," Preston said. He was breathing hard too, grinning like a kid. "Not bad for getting stuck with a complete amateur. You weren't an amateur by the end. You were a sailor." The phrase shouldn't have meant as much as it did, but something in the way he said it, with genuine respect and maybe something else, made Elena's exhausted heart do something complicated. They motored back to the marina in a pack with the other boats, the atmosphere celebratory despite the competition. Other crews called out congratulations, commiserated about wind conditions, and generally acted like they'd all just survived something significant together. Elena supposed they had. At the dock, Marcus materialized with towels and bottles of water, his expression somewhere between smug and delighted. "Second place," he crowed. "Elena, you got second place." Preston got second place. "I just tried not to die or sink the boat." "She's being modest," Preston said, accepting a water bottle. She kept up. Most first-timers would have fallen apart in the first 5 minutes. Marcus looked between them with an expression Elena knew too well. It was his matchmaking face, the same one he got whenever he thought he'd successfully set up 2 people who might be good together. "Don't," she warned him. "Don't what?" "I'm just admiring how well you 2 work together. Really, remarkably well, like you'd been sailing together for years." "Marcus, you should see each other again, maybe practice for next year's race." "Marcus, I swear he's right," Preston interrupted. "We should sail again if you want to, no pressure." Elena looked at him, surprised. He'd stripped off his life vest and sailing jacket, and his T-shirt clung to his frame in ways that made it hard to think straight. But it was his expression that caught her, open and genuine, none of the calculated charm of someone trying to play an angle. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. They exchanged numbers while Marcus watched with barely concealed glee. Preston had to leave for another commitment, something about a board meeting he absolutely couldn't miss, but he promised to text her about setting up another sailing session. After he left, Marcus rounded on her with the intensity of someone who'd been holding back commentary for far too long. "You know who that is?" he demanded. "Yes, Marcus, Preston Zimmerman. I'm aware. And you're going to see him again. Apparently, I'm going to sail with him again." "There's a difference." Marcus made a sound of pure frustration. "Elena, the man is a billionaire. He's 36, single, runs a company that does $500 million in revenue annually, and he just asked you out. He asked me to sail. That's not the same as asking me out." "It's exactly the same thing, and you know it." Elena did know it, but she wasn't ready to admit that to Marcus. The afternoon had been surreal enough without adding the pressure of Marcus's expectations. She drove home in her salt-stiff clothes, muscles already starting to stiffen, and tried to process what had happened. Her phone buzzed as she was stepping into her apartment. "Preston, today was fun. Haven't enjoyed sailing that much in years. You free next Saturday?" Elena stared at the message for a solid minute before responding. "Elena, depends. Will there be competition and mild humiliation, Preston? I can arrange both. Also proper lessons so you don't destroy your hands. Sailing gloves are essential." "Elena, my hands are fine." She looked at her palms, which were definitely developing blisters. "Preston, liar. Bring gloves next time." She smiled despite herself and spent the rest of the evening researching sailing videos and trying to memorize terminology. If she was going to do this again, she wanted to be less of a disaster and more of an actual crew member. The week passed in a blur of client meetings and design reviews. Elena's studio was in the middle of a rebrand project for a restaurant chain, and the clients kept changing their minds about color schemes. By Friday, she was ready to throw someone into the harbor, preferably the marketing director who just rejected their fifth concept. Preston texted regularly throughout the week. Nothing heavy, just casual messages about sailing and recommendations for gear she might need. He also sent her links to videos explaining advanced techniques, which Elena appreciated even as she felt overwhelmed by how much there was to learn. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and perfect wind conditions. Elena drove to the marina with significantly better gear than the previous week, including proper gloves that Preston had recommended from a marine supply store. She felt like a kid showing up for the first day of school, nervous and excited in equal measure. Preston was already on the boat, a different one this time, smaller and sleeker, clearly his personal vessel rather than a race loner. "Morning," he called, offering a hand to help her aboard. "Ready for actual lessons?" "As ready as I'll ever be." They spent the morning going through basics at a much slower pace than the race had allowed. Preston was a patient teacher, explaining concepts thoroughly and letting Elena practice each skill until she felt comfortable. They worked on knots, line handling, sail trim, and reading wind patterns. "You're thinking too hard," Preston said as Elena struggled with a particular knot for the third time. "Your hands know what to do. Stop trying to remember the steps and just feel it." She closed her eyes, let muscle memory take over, and the knot came together perfectly. "There," Preston said, satisfaction in his voice. "Now you've got it." They sailed out of the marina into open water and Preston let Elena take the tiller. It was terrifying and exhilarating, feeling the boat respond to her commands, making decisions about course and trim. She made mistakes, overcorrected a few times, but Preston was right there, calm and encouraging. "You're doing great," he said as she executed a clean tack. Most people take months to get this comfortable. Most people probably have more patience for learning curves. Patience is overrated. Determination gets you further. They sailed for hours, falling into an easy rhythm. Conversation flowed naturally between sailing discussions, touching on everything from Elena's business to Preston's frustrations with board politics. He was surprisingly open, sharing stories about the pressure of running a company that employed thousands of people, the constant weight of decisions that affected lives beyond his own. "Some days I miss when it was just my father and me in a shop making parts on machines we maintained ourselves," he admitted. "Everything was simpler then. But you built something incredible. We built something big. That's not always the same as incredible." He adjusted their course slightly. "What about you? You happy with your business?" Elena considered the question seriously. "Most days, yes. I love the creative work, the problem-solving aspect of design. The business side is harder, dealing with difficult clients, managing employees, handling finances. But when we nail a project, when a client sees our work and their whole face lights up because we've captured exactly what they envisioned, that makes everything worth it." "That's how I feel about sailing," Preston said. "Everything else is noise. This is real." They anchored in a quiet cove for lunch, and Preston produced a cooler with sandwiches, fruit, and drinks. They sat on the deck in companionable silence, eating and watching other boats drift by in the distance. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. "Sure." "Why did you agree to sail with me again? You could race with experienced crews, people who actually know what they're doing." Preston was quiet for a moment, staring out at the water. "Because you weren't afraid to try. That first race you could have quit a dozen times. Most people would have. But you kept going, kept learning, kept pushing even when you were clearly exhausted. That kind of determination is rare. I spend most of my time around people who play it safe, who won't take risks because they're afraid of failing. You're not like that." "I'm terrified of failing. I just hide it well. Being afraid and doing it anyway is called courage." Elena felt her cheeks warm, and it had nothing to do with the sun. "That's very philosophical for a Saturday afternoon. I have my moments." They sailed back as the afternoon stretched into early evening, the wind perfect, the water calm. At the dock, Preston helped Elena secure lines and stow gear with the easy efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. "Same time next week?" he asked. "I'd like that. Maybe we could also grab dinner. There's a restaurant near here that makes incredible seafood. Nothing fancy, just good food and a view of the water." Elena's heart did that complicated thing again. This was definitely crossing from sailing lessons into date territory, and she should probably be more cautious. He was a billionaire CEO, and she was a small business owner with a studio apartment and a beat-up Honda. The power dynamic alone should have made her hesitate. But there was something about the way Preston looked at her, like she was interesting beyond just being decent at learning sailing, that made her want to take the risk. "Dinner sounds good," she said. The restaurant was exactly as advertised, casual and welcoming with incredible views and food that made Elena seriously consider moving to the coast just to eat there regularly. They sat on the deck as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and talked about everything except business and sailing. Preston told her about growing up in a family that valued hard work above everything, how his father had taught him to fix engines before he could drive. Elena shared stories about her chaotic childhood with 3 siblings, the constant noise and competition for attention, how she'd learned to draw just to have something that was entirely hers. "You still draw?" Preston asked. "Or is it all digital now?" "Both. I sketch by hand for initial concepts, then move to digital for refinement. There's something about putting pencil to paper that helps me think more clearly. I'd like to see your work sometime. It's mostly corporate stuff, logos, brand guidelines, marketing materials. Not exactly gallery-worthy. Still counts as art. You're creating things that didn't exist before, shaping how people perceive companies and products. That's powerful." Elena had never thought about her work in quite those terms. Most days it felt like problem-solving and client management, the creative aspect buried under business concerns. But Preston was right. She was creating things, shaping perceptions, telling visual stories. "What about you?" she asked. "You still work with your hands, or is it all boardrooms now?" "I try to spend time in the manufacturing facilities when I can. My VP of operations hates it because I invariably find things that could be improved. And then I get obsessed with optimizing processes instead of focusing on strategy. But walking the factory floor, seeing the actual work being done, that keeps me grounded." They closed down the restaurant, the last customers to leave, and walked slowly back to the parking lot. Elena was hyper-aware of Preston beside her, the way his presence seemed to fill space without being overwhelming. "Thank you for today," she said at her car. "The sailing and dinner, all of it. Thank you for being good company, and for not giving up on sailing despite your clear initial terror." "Who says I'm over my terror? I'm just managing it better," Preston laughed. "Fair enough." He hesitated, then said, "I know this is technically only our second time hanging out, but I really enjoy spending time with you. You're different from most people I meet." "Different good or different concerning? Definitely good. You say what you think. You don't try to impress me or manage me. It's refreshing." "I'm too exhausted from sailing to have energy for games," Elena said, but she smiled. "And you're easy to talk to, for a billionaire CEO." "I'll take that as a compliment." He waited until she was in her car with the engine running before heading to his own vehicle, a sleek black Mercedes that probably cost more than Elena made in a year. She drove home with her mind spinning, replaying conversations, and trying to figure out what exactly was happening between them. The pattern continued for weeks. They'd sail on Saturdays, sometimes racing in local competitions, sometimes just cruising and enjoying the water. Afterward, they'd grab dinner or occasionally lunch before sailing, and each time Elena learned something new about Preston that made him seem less like a distant billionaire and more like a real person she genuinely enjoyed being around. He was funny in a dry way that caught her off guard. He had strong opinions about obscure things like the best type of sailboat winch and whether pineapple belonged on pizza. He was surprisingly nerdy about manufacturing processes and could talk for hours about metallurgy and quality control systems. He was also surprisingly vulnerable when he wanted to be, sharing frustrations about family expectations and the isolation that came with his position. Elena found herself looking forward to Saturdays with an intensity that probably wasn't healthy. Her week revolved around that one day, and she caught herself texting Preston at odd hours about random thoughts or questions about sailing. He always responded, their conversations flowing easily between light and serious, playful and sincere. Marcus noticed, of course. He cornered her at her studio one Wednesday afternoon with the determination of someone who would not be denied. "You're dating Preston Zimmerman," he said without preamble. "We're sailing together." "Elena, you've been sailing together every weekend for 2 months. You text constantly." "Last week you mentioned him 4 times in one conversation without realizing it. That's dating. We haven't defined anything. Why not? That was the question Elena had been avoiding. The truth was she was afraid to define it, afraid that putting a label on whatever was happening between them would somehow break the spell. Preston existed in a world so different from hers that the gap seemed insurmountable when she thought about it too hard. But when they were actually together, none of that seemed to matter. It's complicated, she said finally. It's only complicated if you make it complicated. Do you like him? Yes. Does he like you? I think so. Then what's the problem? The problem was that Elena had been careful her whole life. She'd built her business slowly, taking calculated risks, always having backup plans. Falling for Preston felt like jumping off a cliff without checking if there was water below. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and she wasn't sure she was brave enough to fully commit to the leap. I'm scared, she admitted. Marcus's expression softened. Of course you are. He's intense and successful and way too good-looking for anyone's peace of mind. But Elena, I've known you for 10 years. I've never seen you light up the way you do when you talk about him. That's worth being scared for. That Saturday, they sailed out further than usual, Preston navigating to a spot he claimed had the best sunset views on the coast. He'd brought wine and cheese, proper glasses rather than plastic cups, and as they anchored and watched the sky turn impossible colors, Elena felt something shift inside her. Can I ask you something? Preston said suddenly. Always. What are we doing, this, us, whatever this is? Elena's heart hammered. I don't know. What do you think we're doing? I think I'm falling for you, Preston said, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. I think I started falling for you during that first race when you refused to give up despite being completely out of your depth. I think every Saturday is the best part of my week. I think about you constantly, and I want to know everything about you, and I'm tired of pretending this is just casual sailing lessons. Elena couldn't breathe. The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability in his eyes, it was everything she'd been afraid to hope for. I'm falling for you too, she said. It terrifies me, but I'm falling for you. Preston moved closer and Elena met him halfway. Their kiss tasted like salt air and wine, gentle at first then deeper, weeks of tension and unspoken feelings finally finding expression. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this properly, he said. Date you for real. No more pretending it's just sailing. People are going to think I'm after your money. I don't care what people think. Do you care what people think? Elena considered this. Some people would judge, absolutely. But the people who mattered, Marcus and her family and real friends, they'd see what was actually happening. They'd see two people who genuinely cared about each other figuring things out. No, she said, I don't care. Good, then it's settled, we're dating, officially. Just like that. Just like that. Preston kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it. Fair warning, I'm going to be obnoxiously smitten. I've been holding back for weeks. I can handle obnoxiously smitten. They sailed back in the dark, navigation lights glowing, completely breaking what was probably a dozen safety rules, but neither of them caring. At the marina, Preston walked Elena to her car and kissed her goodnight like they were teenagers, sweet and lingering, neither wanting to be the first to leave. Dating Preston was somehow both exactly what Elena expected and completely different. He was surprisingly traditional in some ways, insisting on picking her up for dates, opening doors, planning elaborate surprises. But he was also completely himself, nerdy and intense, dragging her to manufacturing trade shows and getting excited about new CNC machine technologies. Elena introduced him to her world too, bringing him to art gallery openings and design conferences, teaching him about typography and color theory. He soaked it all in with the same intense focus he brought to everything, asking questions and genuinely engaging with her passion. They still sailed every Saturday when weather permitted, but now they also did normal couple things. Movies and museums, lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers, cooking dinner together in Preston's admittedly much nicer kitchen. Elena met his mother, a formidable woman who ran a charitable foundation, and assessed Elena with sharp eyes before apparently deciding she passed muster. "You're good for him," Mrs. Zimmerman said over tea while Preston was taking a business call. "He's been so serious since his father passed." It's good to see him smile again. Meeting Elena's family was significantly more chaotic. Dinner at her parents' house involved her 3 siblings, 2 nephews, a niece, and enough noise to make normal conversation impossible. Preston handled it beautifully, charming her mother, talking sports with her father, and somehow winning over her protective older brother by enthusiastically discussing his construction business. "He's good," her brother David said while they were cleaning up. "Doesn't seem fake, which I was worried about. Rich guys are usually fake. He's real," Elena confirmed. "Possibly the most genuine person I've ever met." 3 months into officially dating, Preston asked Elena to move in with him. She hesitated, worried about moving too fast, but he made compelling arguments about spending too much time driving between their places and his house having a much better workspace for her art. "I'm not asking you to give up your independence," he said. "I'm asking you to share space with me because I love you and want to wake up next to you every morning." Elena's heart stopped. "You love me." "I've loved you since you nearly fell overboard reaching for that sheet during our first race. You were soaked and exhausted and completely determined, and I thought, there's someone who doesn't quit. I want that person in my life forever." That's a very specific moment to fall in love. I'm a specific guy. So, do you love me back, or am I standing here being vulnerable alone? "I love you," Elena said. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Good scared or bad scared?" "Good scared, the kind that means something matters." She moved in a month later, her minimal furniture swallowed up by Preston's house, which was beautiful but not ostentatiously so. He'd cleared out a whole room for her studio, natural light flooding in through massive windows overlooking the water. It was perfect, almost aggressively perfect, and Elena cried when she first saw it because no one had ever done something so thoughtful for her. They fell into routines, learning each other's quirks and rhythms. Preston was a morning person who went for runs before dawn. Elena preferred to stay up late, working on designs when her brain was most creative. He liked his coffee black. She drank tea with honey. He was obsessively organized. She thrived in creative chaos. Somehow they made it work, compromising and adjusting, building a life that accommodated both of them. Elena's business continued to grow, landing bigger clients and more complex projects. Preston offered advice when asked, but never pushed, respecting her independence and competence. When she had a crisis with a client who refused to pay for completed work, Preston helped her navigate the legal aspects without taking over, supporting rather than rescuing. "You're handling this exactly right," he said, reviewing her documentation. "You don't need me to fix this. You just needed confirmation you weren't crazy for being angry." "I'm very angry." "You're entitled to your anger. Channel it into getting what you're owed." She did, ultimately settling with the client for full payment plus damages. And the victory felt entirely her own, even though Preston had been there to support her through it. They sailed through summer and into fall, racing occasionally, cruising more often, sometimes just sitting on the boat docked at the marina and talking for hours. The water became their place, where the rest of the world fell away and it was just them and the wind and the endless horizon. One Saturday in October, Preston sailed them to a secluded cove Elena had never seen before. He'd packed an elaborate picnic, far more food than they could possibly eat, and seemed nervous in a way she'd never seen him. "You okay?" she asked as they anchored. "I'm great. Just thinking about things." "What things?" Preston took a deep breath, then pulled a small box from his pocket. Elena's heart started racing. "I had a whole speech planned," he said. "Something eloquent about wind and sailing and navigating life together, but the truth is simpler than all that. Elena, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. You challenge me and support me and make every day better just by being in it. I want to spend the rest of my life sailing with you, metaphorically and literally." He opened the box, revealing a ring that was absolutely perfect, simple and elegant with a single diamond that caught the afternoon light. "Will you marry me?" Elena couldn't speak past the emotion clogging her throat. She nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face, and Preston's nervous expression transformed into pure joy. He slipped the ring on her finger, kissed her deeply, and they stayed there in the cove until the sun set, wrapped in each other and plans for the future. The wedding planning was surprisingly stress-free, mainly because neither of them wanted anything elaborate. They settled on a ceremony at the marina, where they'd first sailed together, intimate and meaningful, with reception on Preston's boat for their closest friends and family. Marcus officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion, and gave a ceremony that was equal parts heartfelt and hilarious, including references to Elena's initial sailing incompetence and Preston's obvious immediate attraction, despite said incompetence. "I knew when I asked Elena to fill in that day that something special might happen," Marcus said. "I didn't realize I was setting up a love story, but I'm taking full credit anyway." They said their vows with the water as backdrop, promising to navigate life's challenges together with the same teamwork they brought to sailing. Elena cried through most of it, and Preston's voice cracked on several occasions, and when they finally kissed as husband and wife, their guests erupted in cheers that echoed across the marina. The reception was perfect, food and music and dancing on the deck as the boat gently rocked. Elena's nephews were fascinated by every aspect of the vessel, and Preston patiently explained sailing concepts to them with the same care he'd shown Elena that first day. Watching him with kids, so natural and patient, Elena felt her heart expand with love and the possibility of their future. They honeymooned sailing along the coast, stopping at different harbors and towns, existing in a bubble of just them and the ocean. No work, no obligations, just time to be together and solidify their partnership in every way. "I want kids," Preston said one night as they lay on the deck counting stars. "Not immediately, but eventually. Is that something you want?" "Yes," Elena said without hesitation. "At least 2, maybe 3. 3 is good. Odd numbers are aesthetically pleasing. You're such a nerd." "You married a nerd. Too late to back out now." Life after the wedding settled into a beautiful new normal. Elena ran her studio, Preston managed his company, and they navigated the challenges of 2 demanding careers with communication and compromise. They still sailed every weekend they could, the water remaining their sanctuary and joy. A year into marriage, Elena found out she was pregnant. Preston reacted with such pure, unfiltered excitement that she fell in love with him all over again. He became instantly obsessive about pregnancy books and baby gear, approaching fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything else. "We need to baby-proof the boat," he announced one Saturday. "The baby isn't even born yet. Preparation is key to success." Their daughter arrived on a clear spring morning, tiny and perfect and absolutely overwhelming. They named her Sarah, and Preston cried holding her for the first time, this big, strong man reduced to trembling emotion by 7 pounds of baby. "She's perfect," he whispered. "We made something perfect. We're going to have no idea what we're doing," Elena said, exhausted and exhilarated. "We'll figure it out, just like sailing." They did figure it out, stumbling through sleepless nights and learning curves, supporting each other through exhaustion and adjustment. Sarah was an easy baby, all smiles and curiosity, and watching Preston with her was one of Elena's greatest joys. 2 years later they had a son, Michael, who was decidedly less easy but equally loved. The house became wonderfully chaotic, filled with toys and laughter and the constant noise of family life. Preston scaled back his work hours, promoting trusted executives and delegating more so he could be present for his children's early years. Elena restructured her business too, bringing in a partner to handle day-to-day operations while she focused on creative direction and major clients. It gave her flexibility to be with her kids while maintaining the career she'd built. They introduced both kids to sailing early. Sarah took to it immediately, fearless and determined like her mother. Michael was more cautious, preferring to observe before trying, but eventually he found his rhythm too. Family sailing trips became their tradition, sometimes racing in family-friendly events, more often just cruising and enjoying time together on the water. "Remember our first race?" Elena asked one Saturday as they sailed with both kids, now 6 and 4. "You mean when you almost fell overboard 3 times and I thought I'd made a terrible mistake agreeing to sail with a beginner? You never thought that." "You're right. I thought I'd found someone special. Turned out I was right." Smooth talker. "It's one of my many charms." Their life wasn't perfect. They argued about parenting strategies and money, and whose turn it was to handle the toddler meltdown. Preston traveled for work more than Elena liked, and sometimes she got so absorbed in a design project she forgot to come to bed. But they worked through everything together, committed to the partnership they'd built. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they recreated their first race, just the two of them on a borrowed boat, competing against other couples in the same charity event where they'd met. They didn't win this time, placing a respectable 5th, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling of sailing together, the unspoken communication and trust that came from years of partnership. 10 years, Preston said as they docked. "Best 10 years of my life. Even better than building your company into a global powerhouse. Not even close. The company is what I do. You're who I am." Elena kissed him, soft and lingering, tasting salt and happiness. "I love you, even when you're aggressively romantic. Especially when I'm aggressively romantic." They picked up their kids from Elena's parents, who'd watched them for the day, and drove home as a family. Sarah chattered about a game she'd played with her cousins. Michael fell asleep in his car seat. Preston held Elena's hand while he drove, thumb rubbing circles on her wrist. This was what love looked like, Elena thought. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, though those had their place. But this, the everyday intimacy of shared life, the trust and comfort and absolute certainty that they'd chosen the right person. That night, after the kids were in bed, they sat on their deck overlooking the water, stars emerging as daylight faded. The boat was docked at their private pier, a larger vessel now, suitable for family expeditions. Everything they'd built together was visible from here, the life they'd created from one chance sailing race and the decision to keep showing up for each other. "Happy anniversary," Preston said, handing her a glass of wine. "Happy anniversary. Any regrets?" "Only that I didn't learn to sail sooner so I could meet you earlier. We met exactly when we were supposed to. I wasn't ready for you before then. And now I can't imagine life without you." You're my favorite crew member, my best friend, the love of my life, and the best decision I ever made." Elena leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the steady beat of his heart. "Right back at you, sailor." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one, the water reflecting moonlight like scattered diamonds. Tomorrow, they'd return to the beautiful chaos of family life, work demands and parenting challenges, and all the complications of their busy lives. But tonight was just for them, celebrating 10 years of choosing each other every single day, somewhere in the marina. A boat's rigging chimed in the wind, a sound that always made Elena think of possibilities. She smiled, remembering the nervous woman who'd shown up for a sailing race with no idea what she was doing, only determination and a willingness to try. That decision had changed everything, opening doors to a life more wonderful than she could have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked. "How grateful I am that Marcus's sister got sick and I said yes to filling in for her. How one random Saturday changed my entire life." "Not random, fate. You believe in fate now, Mr. Practical?" "I believe in you and me. Call it whatever you want." Elena tilted her face up for a kiss, sweet and familiar and still capable of making her heart race after all these years. "I call it love, the real kind, the kind that lasts." "Forever," Preston agreed. "Forever," Elena echoed and meant it with everything in her. Years continued to unfold in that same pattern, seasons marked by sailing and growth and the deepening of their partnership. Sarah grew into a fierce competitor, racing in junior sailing leagues and bringing home trophies that Preston displayed with absurd pride. Michael discovered a love for boat design, filling notebooks with sketches of vessels he wanted to build someday. Elena's studio expanded to a second location, her reputation growing to the point where she could be selective about clients. Preston promoted her work shamelessly, recommending her to business contacts and proudly showing off her designs to anyone who'd look. His company continued to thrive, but he never let work consume him the way it might have before Elena. Family came first, always. They added a dog, a rescue mutt who loved sailing as much as they did and became a fixture on the boat. They took the kids to different countries, teaching them about cultures and perspectives beyond their privileged bubble. They fought and made up, struggled and celebrated, grew together and individually, always coming back to the foundation they'd built on trust and genuine love. On their 20th anniversary, with Sarah away at college and Michael in high school, they sailed out to the cove where Preston had proposed. It looked exactly the same, timeless in the way special places are, holding memories in the sand and water. 20 years, Elena said, echoing Preston's words from a decade earlier. How did that happen? One day at a time, one choice at a time, choosing each other every single day. Sounds exhausting when you put it that way. It's the easiest choice I ever make. They renewed their vows there, just the two of them and the setting sun, promises worn smooth by 2 decades of keeping them but no less meaningful. Elena cried again, happy tears this time, grateful for every moment that had led them here. "I love you," Preston said, same words he'd said countless times but somehow knew every time. "I love the life we built. I love who I am with you. I love our family and our home and the fact that you still get excited about sailing after all these years." "I love you too," Elena said. "Thank you for seeing something in that terrified woman who didn't know port from starboard. Thank you for being patient and kind and teaching me to sail. Thank you for choosing me. Always you. Only ever you." They sailed back under emerging stars, the water calm and welcoming, carrying them home to the life they'd built together. Their house glowed with lights, Michael visible through the window, probably working on homework or boat designs. The dog would be waiting at the door, tail wagging in joyful greeting. This was everything Elena had never known to want, a life rich with love and purpose and connection. It had started with one sailing race, one random Saturday, one chance encounter that became the foundation for everything that followed. She thought about that scared woman who'd shown up at the marina so many years ago, and she wished she could tell her not to worry. Everything would work out better than she could possibly imagine. She'd find love in the most unexpected place, with a man who'd see her strength before she fully understood it herself. She'd build a life beyond her wildest dreams, not because of wealth or success, but because of partnership and genuine connection. Preston caught her eye and smiled, that same smile that had first made her heart skip beats 20 years ago. Elena smiled back, full of gratitude and love and the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The wind picked up as they approached the marina, perfect and steady, carrying them home. Together they furled the sails and secured the boat, working in the synchronized silence of long practice. Everything they needed to say had already been said in the way they moved together, trusted each other, chose each other every single day. Hand in hand, they walked up the dock toward their house, toward their son and dog and the beautiful ordinary life they'd created. Behind them, the boat rocked gently in its slip, ready for the next adventure, the next sail, the next chapter of their ongoing story. Elena looked up at the stars emerging in the darkening sky and felt absolutely complete. This was love. This was partnership. This was everything she'd ever needed, found in the most unexpected way with the most wonderful man, all because she'd said yes to one charity sailing race. Sometimes, she thought, the best things in life come from being brave enough to try something new, from showing up even when you're scared, from refusing to give up even when you're completely out of your depth. Sometimes love finds you when you're soaked with seawater and exhausted and determined, and it changes everything. Preston squeezed her hand, and Elena squeezed back, a wordless conversation carrying everything they needed to say. 20 years of love, of partnership, of choosing each other through calm waters and storms alike. And still, every day, the easiest choice she ever made. They stepped inside their home, warmth and light wrapping around them, their son calling out a greeting from upstairs, the dog barking welcome. This was their life, built from one chance encounter and years of commitment. This was their happily ever after, not an ending but an ongoing story of love and partnership and the beautiful adventure of choosing each other, always.